Well, that was probably the strangest thing I've ever seen. Which makes me happy because, funnily, the Grassroots Writing Research Journal is all about the idea that anybody who wants to can think about what it means to be literate in the world. And that there ought to be a place for that kind of thinking to be made visible. And it is not a student journal. And it is not a journal for students, even though students read it. It's a journal where people can talk about what it means to engage in literate practice. And for Scott and Thaddeus, the interesting part about that article for us in the Grassroots Journal was it was a hot mess the first time we saw it. There's no doubt about it, but that's another thing about the journal. We were like, well, could this be something someone could get something out of? Because when you're thinking about literate practice, you can make something out of it, right? It's somebody's literacy. There's something there. And so, to me, this article is actually really successful because of the way it both plays with conventions and because of the way it thinks about itself in a way that I think is interesting. I think the work that our two earlier authors showed you shows how a writer's thinking can evolve about literate practice over the course of time. And what you often see when you look at the videos, which I wanted to mention before we closed, that all of these talks are separated into short videos, and they're all online on our website. So a lot of the articles now have actually pieces that go along with them where the author is talking about them. And in many of those pieces, the authors say really interesting things about how they changed their mind and they would write this very differently. Many of them talk about how the comments in the journal were really freaky and it scared them when they got their comments back for the first time because they were like, I can never publish this. And as an editor of the journal, I can say we often have to convince people after they get their first round of feedback to keep going because getting that criticism really freaks people out. So I think it's really important to note that the whole point of the Grassroots Journal as a thing in the world is so that people can find a place to think about literate practice and think about it carefully, but not necessarily have to say, well, now I'm a big shot scholar and so I can say something about literate practice. I think we all should get to have that chance to say something. So I want to thank you all very much for coming, but I also want to plead with you, if you have just a few more minutes, we'll try to keep it short, but it really is disconcerting to the authors when everyone leaves during their Q&A. So if you could just stick around for a few more minutes and try to think of a few questions to make these authors feel like there was a reason they came out tonight, that would be really, really useful. We'll try to keep it short, but let's just try to do a little bit of Q&A, and then we'll break. And don't forget, we still have snacks over there, we still have hot coffee and tea, so you're welcome to hang around and ask the authors questions, and feel free to take some of the food home if you want to, because we don't have anything to do with it after we're done. So, authors, if you want to come up, and audience, if you want to think about something to ask them, although what you would ask Scott and Thaddeus, I do not know. I really hope to see what someone's going to ask them.
I figured you'd want to sit closest to the head if you want. No, I don't need it.
Okay, question.
Bring your own.
Go ahead, I have one. And if you could just kind of stand up when you do it so people can hear, because the back folks might not be able to hear you.
Okay. This is for, believe it or not, Scott and Thaddeus. Oh, come on. And I'm looking at Jeff right now because Jeff and I also did a collaborative article. And I wanted to ask, how many times did you actually meet and talk with the editors? How many times did it go back and forth? And how many times did you say, fuck it?
And actually, Jeff gave a talk last year at our Colloquium about that collaborative article. So there's another one that you can compare if you want to, because Jeff talked a little bit about Irene and Jeff's practice.
Yeah, I remember. And the reason I ask is that in terms of the process, we kept going back and forth. Do we want to do this? And when Joyce gives these assignments and says, it's your choice if you want to consider this for publication, but let us know because it'll impact what kind or the extensiveness of the comments. So when you hear that and you say, yeah, I want to go for it, and then you get the comments back, you're not going to say, never mind. They've already gone to all this work. So anyway, I can't remember, I think we went back 5 or 6 times, and in the final draft, we did like you did, email, and I remember I kept doing my dialogue, and it just hit me at one point. I thought, this is chat, and we did that 5 or 6 times. Do you remember that? And then it was just right there. But
Yeah, we didn't know until like the 5th draft what the hell our article was about, really.
right, yeah, and so.
That's amazing you actually got there by the 5th draft.
Yeah, we had to wait for it to be published before we could.
So I was just wondering how many times you went back and forth, and how many times did you want to give up?
In physical meet space, we really we met with Megan
twice.
Was it twice?
Yeah.
Oh really? Because earlier you said you didn't remember at all.
That's a different person.
Oh okay. Yeah, it was we met in person twice. I think once was together, and then the other time we met with her separately. Was that it?
I don't know, a lot.
Yeah.
4, I think 4.
Yeah.
But, and then you're at the line edit stage, right, where it's like you're still getting feedback and going back
Yeah.
and forth, but it's no longer about making big changes. I think you guys had 4.
I think so. But also remember that our response to from the initial draft was that we wrote an entirely other thing. So-
Actually, so did Irene and Jeff. Don't you guys remember your second?
Oh, nothing
you said
survived?
completely
I didn't know that.
different-
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, I mean, as to the amount of times that we just said fuck it, I think we said that a lot.
More, yeah.
Yeah, quite a few times. But I mean, also we met with each other very little, very little. I mean, the most is between classes or whenever our office hours overlapped, we'd be like, hey, how about that thing that we're doing, right? And Scott would be like, he'd give me that Scott look where he's like, you know. But but most of our interaction was through the Google Docs stuff. So I mean, some of our comments on there are a little bullshit in that the earliest version of our Google draft says oh, we should remember to put these comments in later. But there are also a lot of them that are very us talking to each other and saying, look at what about this thing, or just writing around each other's text. It's the messiness. I'm so happy that you let us keep so much of the train wreck that we made, because otherwise I have no idea what
Train
we were
wrecks are
doing.
interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let's stop.
Evan, did you have a question?
Yeah, and, I had one for both of the fellows individually. Should I ask them?
Yeah, go ahead and ask
Or-
one, and then we'll give you a second turn.
Thank you. My first one was about the artist statement, which I loved your presentation because in past classes I've had students turn in artist statements after completing a piece of writing. And the students are like, why do we have to write about writing? Isn't the thing enough? And I think your presentation was great about that. And it really brought out points about kind of having the artist statement and the piece of art having this reciprocal relationship where which came first, the artist statement or the piece of art, or knowing that you would have to write an artist statement informs the way you make art. And I wondered, as an artist yourself, if you have now found yourself saying, as you said you were interested in ceramics.
Yeah.
When you sit down to the wheel, and instead of thinking about just what you want to make, do you also say, how am I going to be able to write about what I'm making, and how does that inform the artistic process?
I would say yes. Yes, it does, because writing is so important in arts right now, just in general. And so I do think, it's not so much what am I going to write about this after I make it, it's more why am I making this and can I justify it?
Yeah.
So it's not so much what am I going to put on the paper, it's why am I making this thing and can I put that into words?
And do you think that's added depth to your artistic practice in any way, or?
I think so, because I can't just, make something visually, I'm going to have to explain it in a literate way, and having to do it both ways puts a lot more depth in it, I think.
Do you think if I went to an MFA art talk for ISE for painters, and I found that I didn't like people's paintings as much if they couldn't explain them that well. Do you find that in the art world at all, that you tend to or do you think that's a danger of what if the art is great, the explanation of the art isn't so great? Does that devalue the art? Sorry, this is all kind of big.
No, I think that's, it's definitely a problem, especially, sometimes when people can't write about their art. do you think less of them because they can't explain it in words? But then it all comes
I
back
feel
to,
bad
it's
about
like,
that.
but I'm an artist, I don't need to write, you know, things like that. But I, in a way, yes, personally, I do feel like it devalues the art a little bit if you can't explain yourself and justify why you're doing what you're doing. But I do understand that that is hard for a lot of artists, and it's hard to, you know, make something and explain why you made it. That is difficult, because there's a reason you're doing it visually in the first place. But I actually had an interesting interview with someone who was like, I write this thing about the art, so I make my art, I look at my art and I write this thing, and then my writing gets ahead of my artwork. And so then I start making artwork about my writing, and then my artwork is at this place that my writing isn't. And so she explained it in this leapfrog thing, where like her writing is very in tandem with her art, and I think that is like a very good model to follow. I think that that's really important to be writing while you're creating.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you. And then I can ask one more?
Go ahead.
Thank you, sorry. About the apologies, which are really fascinating too, just because how much I use text not to confront people, because confrontation's scary. I wondered, have you thought about any non-linguistic things that go on in text? And I don't want to say non-linguistic because it's all part of kind of language. But like, I noticed at the end of that one, it said,
It had the slash smile.
it had the slash smile, and how does emoticons play into digital apologies? Because I read it strangely. It looked like I see slash mark face, and I always think like seasickness. I don't know why I have that. Yeah, but like, you know, I wonder how you see emoticons or other things that go on with text, be it punctuation, font, all caps, ellipses at the end, which sometimes my girlfriend uses
And
to
that
be.
one was there in the one
She's
section, the guy
upset with
talked
me.
about breaking his phone and he was like I don't even know what to say to that.
Right, he
So
just
it's that dot, dot, dot.
I know if I say something wrong via text and I get HMMM, I'm in trouble. Like, that means, but if I get an HM, that's different. And I wondered how that played out in
Yeah,
your,
that's,
in your study.
yeah, I was gonna say, definitely like emoticons bring like a bunch of challenging different like ways, like how people read the text message, especially going back to like how sarcasm, you know, some people try to like display their personality through emoticons. Some people kind of overuse them, some people just say, I'm not gonna use them at all. And especially like, I think with the example you were referring to with the slash C6 face or whatever, I think yeah, it's definitely like it depends on people's worldview as well. Because like some people just kind of like, okay, well, I guess conversation's over, or they kind of interpret it in their own way. So I think that creates just a lot of more conflicts for apologizing or communicating.
Thank you.
Other questions? Anybody?
I did.
Michelle, you have one? Okay.
Unless somebody else over here.
Lisa has one, but she'll wait for you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you, even Scott and Thaddeus. Smile and dismissive, you know, were receptive, right? Anyway, I thought that some of this research is really robust. I love that word, right? Because it really kind of digs in. Stephanie, I had a question. You had all these versions of your different apologies, these digital apologies. How did you go about writing those?
Well, for my English 101 article, or how I
Like
intend
for
on
this
writing.
actual presentation, like
Okay.
like you had 3 different examples. Maybe you said something about that, but I didn't hear, like with the bang versus the hang and the Walmart. Like how did you go about writing those actual examples?
I actually didn't write them. I found them on Google
You
Images.
found them on Google.
Yeah, to be honest. But when I was looking for them, I wanted to focus on the 3 different kind of like interpersonal relationships that most undergraduate students have. So I was like, you know, most people talk to someone in their family. Most people talk to someone that they're either dating or that they want to date, maybe. And then the third one was like an example that. What was my third example?
Mom.
Friendship. Yes.
Yeah.
Friendship. Thank you. So I kind of picked examples on Google by finding ones that I thought like could relate to you guys, and then relate to like that I could like kind of branch off of what was within the text message, if that makes sense. So like how he brought up the emoticon, I thought that was interesting. And then the ... it kind of leaves for how messages are sometimes diluted when they're being received. Yeah.
Thank you. Lisa?
Okay, hi. I have questions for the last presenters. I was really impressed by the randomness of the presentation. So in a way you're talking about, breaking a genre, and you're breaking the genre of academic presentation in a way, right, which is kind of fun. And I'm curious, you were talking about interjecting randomness in writing as you guys are collaborating. And I'm curious to know, how do you empower writers to break genres? And I think that's one of the things that, again, I'm thinking about writing as an embodied practice. And I have some students here from my 340 class. We talk a lot about multilingual writing, and sometimes we have students with different linguistic backgrounds and different cultural backgrounds who are not always confident enough to play with genres and to break genres in a way. So I'm just curious to know your ideas about that randomness and playing with the genres, and who has, I guess, power to play with genres, or do we talk about the power relationships between the author and the writer? I don't know if it makes sense.
I don't know if they'll have an answer.
Do you got anything?
Yeah, I don't even know if
No,
I
I
have an answer, but we'll go ahead and talk, and I'll think that you talk.
Because I don't actually have to think to speak. It's a reflex. Well, I mean, my actual background and what I'm studying is creative writing, specifically fiction writing. So my usual response to that is I just find examples of weird writing, or I find exercises that encourage people to break things. I mean, you can find these in a lot of places, whether in textbooks or whatever. But I'll also, have somebody write something normal and air quote normal, in a genre that they know. And I think also just doing chat analysis can get them to start asking questions of, well, why is this formatted in this way? Why are things put together the way they are in this genre that you're using? And then you can just start basically throwing things at them. Well, what if this was for a different audience? Or what if you wanted it to do something, just start changing variables and being like, well, how could you change that? And not necessarily combatively, tell me right now how you can change, but think about just giving them letting them see, letting the sort of analysis that we do, we're encouraged to do in the program, show them some of that background stuff, and then just start giving them options for how to play with it. I mean, that's sort of how I would see it. Let that be a bridge into, well, why does it have to be this way? How else can we accomplish these goals? Or what do you got?
You know I steal everything about this from you.
I know. Now they know.
That's fine. I'm perfectly okay admitting that. I actually do steal most of this stuff from Benny is, but then also have no guidelines. I refuse, when I'm doing something that is meant to break a genre like that, or to make them play with something, no instructions other than you have to break something. And that is all I will give you. You have to figure out how you want to do it. And that probably doesn't give them the power or confidence, but
so you just like to throw,
it will just do.
Throw them in the wilderness.
Yeah, that's my.
I also want to just jump in there for a second with you too. I was thinking of the article you wrote about the graduate student who was also an art curator, and Lisa has this very cool article. So the student is obviously a fluent Spanish speaker, but then is going to grad school in the United States, but also is an expert in this subject in his native country, but then is in the U.S. writing about it in English. And she just has these great examples where the artist is talking about how he goes back and forth between Spanish and English. And I think the question that I kind of have is, yeah, that makes sense. And I love the way that represents not just the thinking, but it's beautiful in its own way. Like watching the brain expose itself, right, on the page, and that's exciting. But then I wonder sometimes, how do you value that? So not just as an experiment to break something, which I have a lot of value for, but to make meaning out of it, make it powerful. And I think that's a really interesting question. I do not have an answer for it. But
it's just how do you respond to that kind of complicated system of writing where people shift from one language to another, from one quote to another. I think it's fascinating, and
I'd love to see some stuff in the journal on that. Any of you folks who are multilingual or experimenting with becoming multilingual, we would love to see some pieces in the journal about that. Anybody else have questions for the authors? Hands? Okay, one more. David, we'll do one more and then we'll let you all go and we
Sorry.
appreciate you there.
So Thaddeus and Scott, do you think that Google Docs made your thing more of a hot mess than having not used Google Docs? Did it make it, was this a successful use of collaborative technology or less successful?
Well, I mean, that's always going to be contingent on how you define success. I mean, we're here.
It totally contributed to that train wreck, yes.
Because yeah, I mean, how else are we
It also
gonna?
made it possible.
Yeah, because how else are we gonna interrupt like paragraphs and things, and like it would have been a whole
I
lot.
mean, there are lots of ways, but yeah, it didn't help that we could do it separately, so that we didn't actually have to communicate, and that we could do it anytime, so yeah, no, it made it worse.
This could not have happened without. Well, I point like it's there in the general direction of the thing we did. Apparently, would not have like. I don't think it would have happened without the technology we had. It's pretty
No,
heavily
that was
tied to
part
it.
of the thing, right? That technology enabled us to a degree that we
Everything enabled us. It was
weren't able to control.
nothing could stop us. It was terrible.
Okay, so I'm going to make one more comment. If any of you are interested or work as artists at all, you really want to think about participating in field study, if you are at all interested in this subject, which I think that some of the questions on Stephanie's project are really interesting in that they relate to like face-to-face versus online apologies and different situations in your life where you've done that. It's actually a lot of really cool questions, and I think it's interesting just to do it. So we have some handouts that you can pick up on your way out if you think you might be willing to help her out. You're helping out a fellow author, that's great. I also want to encourage you, if any of you are in classes where you're being asked to think about grassroots articles or write grassroots articles, keep in mind, we'll look at a lot of different ideas. So anything that you're thinking of, we can probably help you with. Emily's email is up in front, but you can also find us online at iswriting.com. And that's another place where you can find an email to ask if you're interested in one of those studies. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Yeah, but now.